increasingly dealing with two very stark, different realities, Israel's and the U.S. On one hand, the U.S. keeps talking about things calming down in the Middle East. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken touched down in Israel this morning to pursue a cessation of hostilities, coming mere hours after Iranian-backed Hezbollah lobbed rockets that penetrated the Iron Dome and sent Israeli residents fleeing. Not to be outdone, the Israeli military targeted an area near Rafik Hariri University Hospital. The death toll has risen to 13, with 57 people wounded, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The attack just south of Beirut, which came without warning, also damaged the hospital, the health ministry added. Israel said it was targeting Hezbollah's finance organization, which stashed millions of dollars under that hospital.
Hezbollah also claimed credit for an attack this weekend on Prime Minister Netanyahu's vacation home in the seaside town of Caesarea. Then there were the revelations this weekend emanating from a document which was hacked or leaked that revealed sensitive Pentagon documents that detailed Israeli preparation for an attack on Iran and plans for a potential counterattack. Information, meanwhile, Israel keeps bombing Gaza and including a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Okay, to break this all down and offer an analysis of what is next is rising friend Trita Parsi, of the Quincy Institute. So, Trita, Antony Blinken is in Israel right now as we speak, and he got off the plane just a few hours ago. Has he addressed the latest escalation, especially the bombing of this hospital and the money that was being stored underneath, which is what the Israeli government states?
Yeah, on that point, first, let me just clarify one thing that, we've heard this from the Israelis for more than a year, that there were Hamas tunnels under this hospital or these things under those other buildings or at the UN offices, and no clear evidence has been presented at any one of those instances, and certainly not in the case of what they're saying about this hospital in Beirut, nor about this financial system, which is actually community banks. It's become easy, just you connect it to Hezbollah or Hamas, and then suddenly everything becomes a legitimate target. And reality, going to your first question, is that the Biden administration has essentially gone along with all of this, including the changing Israeli objectives when it comes to its invasion of Lebanon, that now goes well beyond Resolution 1701, which again, the Biden administration has now shifted its position to adopt the Israeli position, whereas just weeks ago it was talking about implementing 1701 rather than going beyond it. So I think we're seeing a pattern clearly that continues. We shouldn't be surprised by it any longer, which is the Israelis move the goalpost and the Biden administration pliantly adjusts to that.
Yeah, you'd think this would be a opportunity, really, having killed Yahya Sinwar, to say that a major objective of Israel's military actions has been accomplished. U.S. policy has been to support Israel, given what happened on October 7th. But our stated policy from Biden is that we don't want to have a wider war, and that the devastating toll of innocent civilians there is not acceptable. And Kamala Harris doesn't want this as a campaign issue, as an election day issue, because it's killing her with the progressive base and with Arab Americans. So I would think that now would be the time to be a little more strident in our negotiations with Israel. Blinken, you would think, would say, okay, now enough truly is enough, no more. There's no sign that's happening.
No sign whatsoever. And I would just add to it perhaps the most important factor, which is the Biden administration has now decided to put U.S. troops in what essentially is an active war zone, in a war that is the war of another country. So once the Israelis attack, which is very likely to happen before the elections, and the Iranians respond to that, then we will potentially see Americans getting killed, which will then even further drag us into a war that Congress has not authorized, that no one has been able to explain why it is necessary for the U.S. to fight this war based on our own interests. So the degree to which the escalation has happened, if this had happened within weeks after October 7th, there would have been a tremendous amount of noise. But the Biden administration has managed to choreograph this in such a way that the escalation is slow enough in order for people not to react forcefully enough to the fact that we have escalated matters this far, that we've gone so far that we're now actually putting US troops without congressional authorization in an active war zone, dragging us deeper and deeper into a war that we should not be involved in.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up on that point, Netanyahu obviously has been ignoring the sort of whispers from the United States, these sort of telegraph statements indicating that they're not super happy with the way things are going. He has ignored them, continuing the assault against Hamas and Hezbollah, killing Yahya Sinwar. I mean, but what incentive would he have to change his behavior? These public statements are clearly not backed up by actions. I mean, with the sending of these 100 troops, which they claim is, don't worry, you know, we're only sending them to operate this air missile system. I don't think anyone's buying that. I mean, what incentive would Netanyahu have to change his behavior? The U.S. Hasn't really given him any reason or consequence to do so.
You're absolutely correct. We have provided him zero incentives to listen to us and plenty of incentives not to listen to us. I mean, the mere fact that we're putting the THAAD system in Israel is essentially that every time Israel and Netanyahu escalates this war against our expressed wishes, what does Biden do? He rushes in to protect Israel from the consequences of its own escalation. An escalation we told them not to do. Yet we rush in to protect them from its consequences, which means that we are reducing the cost for Israel to escalate. By reducing the cost for Israel to escalate, we're actually making it easier for Israel to escalate, despite the fact that we say that we don't want it to escalate. And as a result, we end up in this scenario in which we're putting pressure and deterrence against Hezbollah, Iran, Hamas, the Houthis, etc., for them not to escalate, yet we're actually making it easier, less costly for the Israelis to escalate. And no surprise, we're in an escalatory cycle, because if you actually want to break the escalatory cycle, you have to put pressure on all parties, particularly the party that so far has been the one that has done most of the escalation, which is the Israelis. I'm old enough to remember just weeks ago being told that once Israel has killed Sinwar, mindful of the fact that it would have at that point have taken out 3 of the top leaders of Hamas, the 3 top masterminds behind October 7th, that would be it. It would be the end of war. Israel would have achieved its objective. That has now happened. And instead, we're seeing more open conversation about the annexation of Gaza and building more settlements there.
It seems as if it's in nobody's interest, the U.S., Iran, who've openly said it's in nobody's interest to escalate this situation. And yet Netanyahu continues to push back, as we know. So the U.S. has issued this letter last week basically saying if you continue to do this and if you don't allow humanitarian aid in, we are going to pursue potential withholding of weapons and maybe other sanctions. And when asked about this in a press conference just yesterday, I believe, the State Department spokesperson, sort of evaded the answer. It does seem like there is tension within the Biden administration with Netanyahu, and there's a pressure point in that the U.S. is supporting Israel, but has a Netanyahu problem. Also, other countries have decided, UK, Canada, have decided to withhold weapons to Israel, perhaps maybe some sort of backdoor conversation between the U.S., Biden, and those countries who don't have as strong of an agreement or allyship with the state of Israel. How much of this is a state of Israel problem or a Netanyahu problem? And how, I mean, if you were to imagine some scenario, what would legally the U.S., as an ally of Israel, be able to do under the conditions of Netanyahu's leadership right now, or alternatively, somebody else?
So let me first start off by saying that, when it comes to these different issues, what other countries have done in terms of reducing, in some cases stopping arms sales, is because of a very simple reason. The evidence of war crimes are so overwhelming. It is actually surprising that some of them have not cut off all of their arms support so far, because they know very well that once the full scope of the evidence emerges, they will also be held accountable. And for some of the states in Europe, who otherwise tend to put a tremendous amount of premium on international law, this is a very, very sensitive issue. The fact that the administration has sent this letter is also its own admission that it knows very well that the Israelis are violating conditions that have been put forward in American law, particularly when it comes to allowing for humanitarian aid, American humanitarian aid to get through. And the law essentially says if that's the case, they are not eligible for any weapons shipments or military assistance. The fact that the administration is giving them a 30-day notice for this is not something that is stipulated in the law. It conveniently falls after the election, but it's a clear indication the administration itself knows quite well what the Israelis are doing, that it's illegal, that the U.S. itself is not following its own laws, and it should. And I think, again, this is, once we're a couple of months away from how this ends, however it ends, and more evidence starts to emerge of what happened, I think it's going to be devastating when we do the introspection of what we did, what we didn't do, and the lies that we told to allow this to continue.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.